So, I had to write this down because this is pretty good. But overall, there's positive and negative stuff all over the place lately. I believe weeks ago, the gay marriage vote was denied, and the contraception vote was denied, though they could be juggled back up for the primaries this fall. So I don't know. The states' rights thing sort of made tension on whether or not it was going to be illegal to travel across state lines to get an abortion, but this thankfully, I guess, did not happen. You're allowed to travel, as sad as it is that you would have to do that. Alright, in an article from the New York Times called Kansas Results Suggest 4 out of 5 states would back abortion rights in similar vote. Alright. There was every reason to expect a close election. Instead, Tuesday's resounding victory for abortion rights supporters in Kansas offered some of the most concrete evidence yet that the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade has shifted the political landscape. The victory by a 59-41 margin in a Republican stronghold suggests Democrats will be the energized party on an issue where Republicans have usually had an enthusiasm advantage. That's what it says, too. The Kansas vote implies that around 65% of voters nationwide would reject a similar initiative to roll back abortion rights, including in more than 40 of the 50 states. A few states on each side are very close to 50-50. This is a rough estimate based on how Democratic characteristics predicted the result of recent abortion referendums, but it is an evidence-based way of arriving at the fairly obvious conclusion. If abortion rights wins 59% support in Kansas, it's doing even better than that nationwide. It's a tally that's aligned with a recent national survey that showed greater support for legal abortion after the court's decision, and the high turnout, especially among Democrats, confirms that abortion is not just some wedge issue of importance to political activists. The stakes of abortion policy have been high enough that it can drive a high midterm turnout on its own. None of this proves that the issue will help Democrats in the midterm elections, and there are limits to what can be gleaned from the Kansas data. But the lopsided margin makes one thing clear: the political wins are now at the backs of abortion rights supporters. A surprisingly decisive outcome. There was not much public rolling in the run-up to the Kansas election, but the best available data suggests that voters would probably split fairly evenly on abortion. In a Times compilation of national polling publishing this spring, 48% of Kansas voters said they thought abortion should be mostly legal, compared with 47% who thought it should mostly be illegal. Similarly, the cooperative election study in 2020 found that the state's registered voters were evenly split on whether abortion should be legal. The results of similar recent referendums in Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, and West Virginia also pointed toward a close race in Kansas. Perhaps even one which a, quote, no vote to preserve abortion rights have had the edge. As with the Kansas vote, a yes vote in each of those 4 states' initiatives would have amended a state constitution to allow significant restrictions on abortion rights or funding for abortion. In contrast with Kansas, the initiatives passed in all 4 states, including a 24-point victory in Louisiana in 2020. But support for abortion rights outpaced support for Democratic presidential candidates in relatively white states across all 4 states, especially in less religious areas outside the Deep South. It's a pattern that suggests abortion rights would have much greater support than Joe Biden did as a candidate in relatively white states like Kansas. Perhaps even enough to make abortion rights favored to survive. It may seem surprising that abortion supporters would even have a chance in Kansas. Same here, I'm surprised. Given the state's long tradition of voting Republicans, but Kansas is more reliably Republican than it is conservative. The state has an above-average number of college graduates, a group that has swung towards Democrats in recent years. Kansas voted for Donald J. for Donald J. Trump by around 15% points in 2020, enough to make it pretty safely Republican. Yet it's not quite off the board for Democrats. Republicans have learned this the hard way. Look no further than the 2018 Democratic victory in the governor's race. Even so, a landslide victory for abortion rights in Kansas did not appear to be a probable outcome. Whether based on the polls or the recent initiatives, the likeliest explanation for the surprise, voters may be more supportive of abortion rights in the aftermath of overturning of Roe, as national polls imply. They may be more cautious about eliminating abortion rights now that there are real policy consequences to these initiatives. Abortion rights supporters may be more energized to go to the polls. Abortion rights supporters may not always find it easy to advance their cause. They were defending the status quo in Kansas. Elsewhere, they will be trying to overturn abortion bans. Whatever the explanation, if abortion supporters could fare as well as they did in Kansas, they would have a good chance to defend abortion rights almost anywhere in the country. The state may not be as conservative as Alabama, but it is much more conservative than the nation as a whole, and the result was not close. There are only 7 states in the Deep South and the Mountain West where abortion rights supporters would be expected to fall in a hypothetically similar initiative. A shift in turnout. If there are any rules about the partisan turnout in American politics, it's that registered Republicans turn out at higher rates than registered Democrats. While the Kansas figures are still preliminary, it appears that registered Democrats were likelier to vote than registered Republicans. Overall, 276,000 voters participated in the Democratic primary, which held on Tuesday as well, compared with 451,000 who voted in the Republican primary. The Democratic tally amounted to 58% of the number of registered Democrats in the state, while the number of Republican primary voters was 58% of the number of the registered Republicans. Unaffiliated voters are the second largest group in Texas. In Johnson County, outside Kansas City, 67% of registered Democrats turned out compared with 60% of the registered Republicans. This is a rare feat for Democrats in high turnout elections. In nearby Iowa, where historical turnout data is easily accessible, turnout among registered Democrats in a general election was never eclipsed turnout among registered Republicans in at least 40 years. The superior Democratic turnout helps explain why the result was less favorable for the abortion opponents than expected. And it confirms that Democrats are now far more energized on the abortion issue, reversing a pattern from recent elections. It may even raise Democrats' hopes that they could defy the long-standing tendency for the president's party to have poor turnout in midterm election. For Republicans, the turnout figures may offer a modest silver lining. They might reasonably hope that turnout will be more favorable in the midterms in November, when abortions won't be the only issue on the ballot, and Republicans will have many more reasons to vote, including control over Congress. So this is hopeful in my heart. Yeah, I wrote this, by the way, this part. So this is hopeful in my heart personally, but with the way the Republican citizens vote, which is relatively how people aren't heard in their own state, but this changes how I feel. In a tweet by Steve Kornacki, Kornacki, sorry. In the first test of the post-Roe atmosphere, Kansas rejects 59-41, a constitutional amendment declaring abortion not a protected right. But in the last decade, Roe versus Wade was still operative. Virtually identical amendments went 4-4. So Tennessee 53-47, Atlanta 59-41, West Virginia 52-48, and in LA 61-39. So I must really back away from shitting on Republicans as a whole, as much as it is fun. If any of you have gotten this far, you must agree, right? Like, And I almost didn't know there was a difference between Republican and conservative, but there has to be. I know I sound dumb right now, but I'm just kind of thankful that there are people out there still fighting, even though they're in red states. All right, see ya.